The sun was setting over the sprawling Los Angeles skyline, casting a golden glow across the sleek glass exterior of Monarch Tower. On the top floor, Lucas Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, a glass of scotch in hand, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the horizon. At 45, he was the epitome of success, handsome, wealthy, and powerful. Yet, as he watched the day fade into night, a familiar emptiness gnawed at his heart. 10 years. It had been a decade since Amelia, the love of his life, had vanished without a trace. The pain of her disappearance still felt as fresh as the day she left. Lucas took a sip of his drink, the amber liquid burning a path down his throat, a sensation that momentarily distracted him from the ache in his chest. "Mr. Blackwood," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting his melancholy reverie. "There's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." Lucas frowned. It was well past office hours, and he wasn't expecting anyone. "Who is it, Janet?" There was a pause, then Janet's voice came through again, this time with a tremor of uncertainty. "Sir, she says her name is Amelia Blackwood." The glass slipped from Lucas's fingers, shattering on the polished marble floor. His heart began to race, and for a moment, he thought he might be having a heart attack. Amelia? It couldn't be. He must have misheard. "Sir, are you all right? Should I send her away?" Janet's concerned voice cut through his shock. "No," Lucas practically shouted, his composure crumbling. "Send her in, now." The seconds ticked by like hours as Lucas waited, his mind reeling. Was this some cruel joke? A case of mistaken identity? Or had the impossible happened? Had Amelia really returned after all these years? The door to his office opened slowly, and Lucas felt his breath catch in his throat. There she was, Amelia. Her honey blonde hair was shorter now, framing a face that was older but still achingly beautiful. Her emerald eyes, once filled with laughter and love, now held a mix of apprehension and determination. "Hello, Lucas," she said softly, her voice sending a jolt through his system. It was her, really her. Lucas stood frozen, unable to move or speak. 1,000 questions raced through his mind, battling with the surge of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Love, anger, relief, betrayal. They all swirled together in a dizzying maelstrom. I know this must be a shock," Amelia continued, taking a tentative step forward. "I can't imagine what you must be thinking right now." Finally finding his voice, Lucas managed to choke out, 10 years, Amelia. 10 years without a word. Where have you been? Why did you leave? Do you have any idea what you've put me through?" Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes. "I'm so sorry, Lucas. I never wanted to hurt you. I had no choice. I had to protect." She was cut off by a small voice from the hallway. "Mama, can I come in now?" Lucas's eyes widened in disbelief as a young boy, no more than 9 or 10 years old, peeked around the doorframe. The child had Lucas's dark hair and Amelia's green eyes. It was like looking at a ghost from the past, the spitting image of Lucas himself at that age. Amelia turned to the boy, her voice gentle. "Yes, sweetheart, come in." She held out her hand, and the child walked into the office, looking up at Lucas with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. "Lucas," Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'd like you to meet Daniel. Your son." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Lucas gripped the edge of his desk for support, his knuckles turning white. A son? He had a son he never knew about? "My son?" Lucas repeated, his voice hoarse with shock. Daniel looked up at him, a tentative smile on his face. "Hi, Dad," he said shyly. The word, Dad, hit Lucas like a physical blow. He stared at the boy, seeing his own features reflected back at him. The same strong jaw, the same slight dimple in the chin. There was no denying it. This was his child. How is this possible?" Lucas asked, his mind struggling to process the revelation. Amelia took a deep breath. "I was pregnant when I left, Lucas. I found out just days before everything happened. I wanted to tell you, but then I discovered." She broke off, glancing at Daniel. "Can we talk privately?" Lucas nodded numbly, still unable to take his eyes off the boy, his son. Janet, he called out, his voice shaky. Can you please take Daniel to the break room? Get him whatever he'd like. As Janet led Daniel out, the boy looked back over his shoulder, his green eyes, Amelia's eyes, filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The door closed behind them, leaving Lucas alone with the wife he'd thought he'd lost forever. Explain, Lucas said, his voice low and intense. Explain everything, Amelia, right now. Amelia sank into one of the leather chairs in front of his desk, her composure finally cracking. It's a long story, Lucas. And it's not going to be easy to hear. I've waited 10 years, Lucas replied, his tone hard. I think I can manage a few more minutes. Taking a deep breath, Amelia began her tale. Do you remember the night before I disappeared? The charity gala for your father's foundation? Lucas nodded, the memory of that night still vivid in his mind. It was the last time he'd seen her, radiant in an emerald gown that matched her eyes, laughing as they danced under the crystal chandeliers. That night, I overheard a conversation, Amelia continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Your father was talking to someone, I couldn't see who. But what I heard, Lucas, it was terrible. They were discussing money laundering, bribes to government officials, even arranging accidents for people who got in their way. Lucas felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. His father, Gregory Blackwood, had been a pillar of the community, a respected businessman known for his philanthropy. He had passed away 5 years ago, leaving Lucas to take over the family empire. That's impossible, Lucas said, shaking his head in denial. My father would never. I'm sorry, Lucas, but it's true, Amelia insisted, her eyes pleading for him to believe her. I was shocked too. I didn't want to believe it. But then I heard them mention my name. They knew I was there, that I might have overheard. Your father said. She swallowed hard. He said they needed to take care of the problem. Lucas felt sick. Could it be true? Had his father really been involved in such nefarious activities? And had he truly threatened Amelia? Why didn't you come to me? Lucas asked, his voice cracking. We could have faced it together, gone to the authorities. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. I was scared, Lucas. Terrified. I didn't know who to trust. And then I found out I was pregnant. I couldn't risk our child's life. So I ran. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Lucas still couldn't quite believe it. But why stay away for so long? Why not reach out to me once my father had passed away? I wanted to, Amelia said, her voice thick with emotion. Every day, I wanted to come back to you. But I was never sure it was safe. Your father's network was vast, and I didn't know who might still be loyal to him, even after his death. It wasn't until recently that I felt it might be safe enough to return. Lucas stood up abruptly, pacing the length of his office. His mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the father he thought he knew with the monster Amelia was describing. And then there was Daniel, a son he had never known, who had grown up without him. I need proof, Lucas said finally, turning to face Amelia. If what you're saying is true, there must be evidence. Amelia nodded, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small flash drive. I've spent years gathering information, Lucas. Bank records, emails, recorded conversations. It's all here. Lucas took the drive, feeling its weight in his hand. It seemed impossible that such a small object could contain revelations that might destroy everything he thought he knew about his family, his company, his entire life. I'll need time to verify all of this, he said, his voice heavy. I understand, Amelia replied softly. We can stay at a hotel. No, Lucas interrupted, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. No, I want you to stay here. Both of you. I have a guest suite in the penthouse. I need time with my son. Amelia's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with gratitude. Thank you, Lucas. Daniel will be thrilled. He's heard so much about you. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door, and Janet poked her head in. Mr. Blackwood? Daniel was wondering if he could come back in. Lucas nodded, and a moment later, his son, walked back into the office, a hesitant smile on his face. Hey, sport, Lucas said, the endearment feeling foreign yet right on his tongue. How would you like to see where I live? Daniel's face lit up. Really? That would be awesome. As they left the office together, Lucas felt a whirlwind of emotions. His life had been turned upside down in the span of an hour. He had a son to get to know, a wife's story to verify, and potentially, a dark family legacy to confront. But as he looked at Daniel's excited face and felt Amelia's presence beside him, Lucas realized that for the first time in 10 years, the emptiness inside him was beginning to fade. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was no longer facing them alone. The elevator doors closed, taking them up to the penthouse, and to a future that suddenly held both uncertainty and hope. The penthouse elevator doors slid open silently, revealing a spacious living area that seemed to float above the twinkling Los Angeles skyline. Daniel's eyes widened in awe as he stepped into the room, his gaze darting from the modern art pieces adorning the walls to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. Wow, he breathed, pressing his face against the glass. You can see everything from up here. Lucas watched his son with a mixture of joy and heartache. He'd missed so much: first steps, first words, first day of school. All those milestones he should have been there for, gone in the blink of an eye. But here was Daniel now, flesh and blood, a living reminder of what he'd lost and what he might still gain. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? Lucas said, moving to stand beside Daniel. I often come here to think, especially at night when the city is all lit up. Daniel turned to him, his green eyes, so like Amelia's, shining with excitement. Do you ever feel like Superman up here? Like you could just jump out and fly over the city? Lucas chuckled, surprised by how natural it felt. I can't say that I have, but I like the way you think, kiddo. Amelia stood a few feet away, watching their interaction with a bittersweet smile. Daniel has quite the imagination, she said softly. He's always dreaming up adventures. Lucas felt a pang in his chest. How much had he missed? How many stories, how many dreams had he not been there to hear? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the present moment. Well, then, Daniel, why don't you tell me about some of these adventures while we get settled in? As they moved through the penthouse, Lucas showed them to the guest suite, a spacious area with 2 bedrooms, a shared bathroom, and a small sitting area. Daniel immediately claimed the room with the best view, dropping his backpack on the bed and bouncing on the mattress with glee. This is so cool, he exclaimed. It's like being in a fancy hotel, but better because you're here, Dad. The word, Dad, still sent a jolt through Lucas. It was foreign and familiar all at once, a title he'd never known he wanted until this moment. I'm glad you like it, Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. Listen, why don't you get unpacked and settled in? I need to talk to your mom for a bit, but then maybe we can order some dinner and you can tell me all about those adventures of yours. Daniel nodded enthusiastically, already pulling action figures and books from his backpack. Lucas and Amelia stepped out, closing the door softly behind them. In the hallway, the air between them grew heavy with unspoken words and a decade of separation. Lucas led Amelia to his home office, a smaller, more intimate space than his work office. As he closed the door, he felt the weight of their shared history settling on his shoulders. Amelia, he began, his voice low and controlled, I need to know everything. Not just about my father and his activities, but about you, about Daniel. These past 10 years, I need to understand. Amelia sank into one of the leather armchairs, her composure finally cracking. Where do I even begin, Lucas? That night at the gala, when I overheard your father, it was like my whole world shattered. Everything I thought I knew about our life, about the man I married and his family, it all came crashing down. Lucas leaned against his desk, arms crossed. But why run? Why not come to me? We could have faced it together, Amelia. We were a team. Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes. I was terrified, Lucas. Your father. The way he talked about taking care of problems, it chilled me to the bone. And when I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. All I could think about was protecting our baby. Lucas closed his eyes, pain etched across his features. So you left. Without a word, without a trace. Do you have any idea what that did to me, Amelia? I thought you were dead. I hired private investigators. I searched for years. I mourned you. I'm so sorry, Amelia whispered, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. But I was convinced that if I stayed, if I told you what I'd heard, it would put you in danger too. Your father's reach seemed limitless. I didn't know who to trust. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, frustration and old pain bubbling to the surface. Where did you go? What have you been doing all this time? Amelia took a deep breath, steadying herself. I went to Europe first, bounced around different countries, always looking over my shoulder. I had some money saved, and I picked up odd jobs here and there. When Daniel was born, I settled in a small town in Italy. I worked as an English teacher, kept a low profile. But I never stopped gathering information, trying to understand the full scope of what your father was involved in. Lucas listened, his heart aching for the life Amelia had been forced to live, for the family they could have been. And Daniel? What does he know about all this? He knows that his father is a successful businessman in America, Amelia said softly. I've told him stories about you, about us, but I never told him why we left. I wanted to protect him from that darkness for as long as I could. Lucas nodded, understanding but still hurt. So why come back now? After all this time? Amelia leaned forward, her eyes intense. Because I finally have enough evidence to expose everything, Lucas. Your father's death 5 years ago weakened his network, but it didn't dismantle it entirely. There are still people in your company, in positions of power, who were part of his illegal operations. And I fear they might be trying to restart them. Lucas felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He'd spent the last 5 years rebuilding his father's company, thinking he was carrying on a noble legacy. Could it all have been built on lies and crime? I need to see that evidence, he said, his voice hard. Every bit of it. If what you're saying is true, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Amelia nodded, reaching into her purse to pull out the flash drive she'd shown him earlier. It's all here, bank records, emails, recorded conversations. Some of it dates back to before we were married, Lucas. Your father's operations, they were extensive. Lucas took the drive, feeling its weight in his hand. It was surreal to think that this small object contained information that could potentially destroy everything he'd worked for, everything he thought he knew about his family. I'll need time to go through all of this, he said, his voice heavy. To verify it, to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Of course, Amelia replied. Take all the time you need. I'm just glad you're willing to listen, to look at the evidence. I was so afraid you'd turn us away, that you wouldn't believe me. Lucas looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd walked back into his life. Despite the years that had passed, he could still see the woman he'd fallen in love with, strong, determined, fiercely protective. But there was a weariness in her eyes now, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. I don't know what to believe right now, Amelia, he said honestly. But I know that I need to uncover the truth, for Daniel's sake if nothing else. He deserves to know his heritage, whether it's something to be proud of or something we need to make right. A knock at the door interrupted their intense conversation. Dad? Daniel's voice called out. Can I come in? I'm hungry, and you promised we could order dinner. Lucas couldn't help but smile at the sound of his son's voice. It was still so new, so wondrous to hear himself addressed as Dad. Come on in, sport, he called back. Daniel bounded into the room, his earlier shyness seemingly forgotten. Can we get pizza, with extra cheese and pepperoni? Lucas glanced at Amelia, who nodded with a small smile. Pizza sounds perfect, he said. Why don't you help me order, and then while we wait, you can tell me all about those adventures of yours. As they moved to the living room to order dinner, Lucas felt a strange mix of emotions washing over him. There was joy at getting to know his son, anxiety about the revelations Amelia had brought, and a deep, lingering pain from the years of separation. But underlying it all was a sense of determination. Whatever the truth turned out to be, he would face it head-on, for Daniel's sake and for his own. The next few hours passed in a blur of pizza, laughter, and Daniel's animated storytelling. Lucas found himself captivated by his son's vivid imagination and quick wit. He told tales of pirate adventures on the Mediterranean, of hidden treasures in ancient Italian ruins, and of daring escapes from imaginary villains. And then, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, just when we thought we were cornered, I found a secret passage behind the old painting. We slipped through just as the bad guys burst into the room. Lucas chuckled, completely enthralled. That's quite the escape, buddy. You've got quite a knack for storytelling. Amelia, who had been quietly observing their interaction, smiled softly. He gets that from you, you know. You always did have a way with words. The comment hung in the air, a bittersweet reminder of the life they once shared, of the family they could have been. Lucas felt a lump form in his throat, but he pushed it down, focusing on the present moment. Well, he said, clearing his throat, it seems like Daniel got the best of both of us. Your creativity and my charm, right? Daniel beamed at the compliment, but a yawn interrupted his smile. The excitement of the day was clearly catching up with him. I think it might be bedtime for our little adventurer, Amelia said gently. It's been a long day, and tomorrow's going to be busy too. Lucas felt a pang of disappointment. He wasn't ready for this magical evening to end, wasn't ready to let his newfound son out of his sight. But he knew Amelia was right. Your mom's right, kiddo, he said, ruffling Daniel's hair. But how about tomorrow we go out and have a real adventure? I could show you around the city, maybe take you to the Santa Monica Pier? Daniel's eyes lit up with excitement. Really? That would be awesome. Can we go on all the rides? Lucas laughed. We'll see about that. Now off to bed with you. Sweet dreams, son. As Amelia led Daniel to his room, Lucas began clearing away the pizza boxes, his mind whirling with the events of the day. How had his life changed so dramatically in just a few short hours? This morning, he'd been a lonely, successful businessman. Now, he was a father, reunited with the wife he'd thought he'd lost forever, and potentially on the brink of uncovering a massive conspiracy within his own company. When Amelia returned, she found Lucas standing at the windows, staring out at the city lights. He's asleep, she said softly, out like a light as soon as his head hit the pillow. Lucas nodded, not turning around. He's amazing, Amelia. So bright, so full of life. I've missed so much. Amelia moved to stand beside him, close but not touching. I'm sorry, Lucas. I know it doesn't change anything, but I truly am sorry for keeping him from you for so long. Lucas finally turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and longing. I understand why you did it, even if it hurts. But Amelia, we can't go back to how things were. Too much has happened, too much time has passed. I know, she whispered. I'm not asking for that. I want us to find a way forward, for Daniel's sake. And I need your help to uncover the truth about your father's operations, to make sure Daniel is safe. Lucas nodded, his expression resolute. I'll start going through the evidence tomorrow. If what you've uncovered is true, we'll need to tread carefully. There could be powerful people involved who won't want this information to come to light. What will you do? Amelia asked, concern etching her features. If it turns out that your company, your father's legacy, is built on criminal activities? Lucas took a deep breath, the weight of potential decisions heavy on his shoulders. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Even if it means dismantling everything my father built. I won't let Daniel inherit a legacy of corruption. Amelia reached out, hesitantly placing her hand on his arm. You're a good man, Lucas. You always have been. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with you all those years ago. The touch sent a jolt through Lucas, awakening feelings he'd thought long buried. For a moment, he was tempted to pull her close, to lose himself in the comfort of her embrace. But he held back, the pain of their separation still too raw. We should get some rest, he said, gently stepping away. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As they said their good nights and retreated to their separate rooms, Lucas felt a strange mix of hope and trepidation. He had his son now, a chance at the family he'd always wanted. But the road ahead was fraught with danger and difficult truths. Lying in bed, Lucas stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. The flash drive Amelia had given him sat on his nightstand, a silent promise of revelations to come. What would he find when he delved into its contents? How deep did his father's corruption go, and how many people in his current organization were involved? More importantly, how would these revelations affect Daniel? Lucas had just found his son. The thought of anything threatening their newfound relationship filled him with a fierce protectiveness he'd never experienced before. As sleep finally began to claim him, Lucas made a silent vow. No matter what truths the morning might bring, no matter what sacrifices he might have to make, he would protect his son. He would build a legacy that Daniel could be proud of, even if it meant tearing down everything he'd thought he knew. With that resolution firmly in mind, Lucas drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever challenges the new day might bring. The early morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting Lucas's penthouse in a warm golden glow. Lucas sat at his desk, the flash drive Amelia had given him plugged into his laptop. He'd been up since dawn, poring over the contents, and with each passing hour, he felt the foundations of his world crumbling beneath him. Bank statements, coded emails, audio recordings, the evidence was damning and extensive. His father, the man he'd idolized and sought to emulate, had been at the center of a vast network of corruption. Money laundering, bribery, insider trading, it was all there, meticulously documented. Lucas ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his mind reeling. How could he have been so blind? Had he been willfully ignorant, too caught up in his own success to see the rot at the core of his father's empire? A soft knock at the door pulled him from his troubled thoughts. Lucas? Amelia's voice called softly, "Are you all right? You've been in there for hours." Lucas took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Come in, Amelia," he said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Amelia entered, concern etched on her face. She took in Lucas's haggard appearance, the scattered papers on his desk, and the haunted look in his eyes. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. Lucas nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. As Amelia sat down, he struggled to find the words to express the turmoil within him. "It's all true," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything you said about my father, about the company, it's all true. And it's even worse than I imagined." Amelia reached across the desk, hesitating for a moment before placing her hand over his. "I'm so sorry, Lucas. I know how much your father meant to you." Lucas felt a surge of conflicting emotions at her touch, comfort, longing, and a lingering anger that he couldn't quite shake. He pulled his hand away gently, needing to maintain some distance to think clearly. "The corruption goes deep, Amelia," he said, turning the laptop so she could see the screen. "It's not just my father. There are board members, executives, even some government officials involved. This isn't just about one man's crimes, it's an entire system of corruption." Amelia's eyes widened as she scanned the information on the screen. It's even more extensive than I realized. "Lucas, what are you going to do?" Before Lucas could respond, they heard the patter of small feet in the hallway. A moment later, Daniel poked his head into the room, his hair tousled from sleep and his eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, Mom, are you ready for our adventure? Can we go to the pier now?" he asked eagerly. Lucas felt his heart constrict. How could he explain to this innocent child that his world was on the verge of falling apart? That the grandfather he'd never known had left a legacy of crime and corruption? Forcing a smile, Lucas stood up. "Of course, buddy. Just let me grab a quick shower and some coffee, and we'll head out." "Why don't you go get ready?" As Daniel scampered off, his excitement palpable, Amelia turned to Lucas with concern. "Are you sure you're up for this? We could postpone if you need more time to process everything." Lucas shook his head firmly. "No, I promised him an adventure, and that's what he'll get. I've already missed so much of his life, Amelia. I won't miss any more because of my father's sins." Amelia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "All right, but Lucas, we need to talk about this. About what it means for you, for the company, for us." "I know," Lucas said, his voice heavy with the weight of decisions to come. "And we will. But for now, let's just give Daniel a day to remember. He deserves that much." An hour later, they were in Lucas's sleek black SUV, heading towards Santa Monica. Daniel chattered excitedly from the backseat, pointing out landmarks and asking questions about everything he saw. Lucas found himself smiling despite the turmoil in his mind, his son's enthusiasm infectious. As they walked along the bustling pier, the smell of salt air and cotton candy filling their nostrils, Lucas felt a sense of normalcy he hadn't experienced in years. They rode the Ferris wheel, Daniel squealing with delight as they reached the top and the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean spread out before them. They played carnival games, Lucas winning an oversized stuffed elephant that Daniel immediately named Peanut. For a few precious hours, Lucas was able to push aside the looming crisis, to simply be a father enjoying a day out with his son. He watched with pride as Daniel bravely tried new foods, laughed at his son's terrible jokes, and felt his heart swell when Daniel slipped his small hand into Lucas's as they walked. But reality had a way of intruding, even on the most perfect of days. As they sat on a bench, enjoying ice cream cones and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Lucas's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed it was Jack Thornton, his chief financial officer and one of his most trusted executives. Lucas hesitated, his thumb hovering over the answer button. Jack's name had appeared in some of the documents he'd reviewed that morning, implicated in some of his father's more questionable financial dealings. "You should take it," Amelia said softly, noticing his conflicted expression. "It could be important." Nodding grimly, Lucas stood up. "I'll just be a minute," he said, moving a short distance away to take the call. "Jack," he answered, his voice carefully neutral. "What's going on?" "Lucas, thank God," Jack's voice came through, sounding stressed. "We've got a situation. The SEC is asking questions about some of our offshore accounts. They're talking about launching a full investigation." Lucas felt his blood run cold. It was starting already. "How much do they know?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Not much yet, but they're digging." "Lucas, if they start pulling at threads, we need to contain this." The implication in Jack's voice was clear. They needed to cover their tracks, to hide the evidence of years of financial misdeeds. Lucas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his father's legacy pressing down on him. "I'll be in the office first thing tomorrow morning," Lucas said firmly. "We'll discuss this then. For now, don't do anything. Don't talk to anyone, understand?" After ending the call, Lucas stood for a moment, staring out at the ocean. The peaceful day with his family suddenly felt like a distant dream. Reality was crashing back in, demanding decisions that would shape not just his future, but Daniel's as well. "Bad news?" Amelia asked as he returned to the bench. Lucas nodded, his expression grim. "The beginning of it, I think. We should head back." As they drove home, Daniel's excited chatter about their day filled the car, but Lucas found it hard to focus. His mind was racing, considering options, weighing consequences. By the time they reached the penthouse, he had come to a decision. After tucking an exhausted Daniel into bed, Lucas found Amelia in the living room, gazing out at the city lights. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Amelia turned, concern etched on her face. "What are you going to do, Lucas?" Lucas took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "I'm going to turn myself in," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "I'm going to the SEC, to the FBI if necessary. I'll tell them everything, about my father, about the company, all of it." Amelia's eyes widened in shock. "Lucas, are you sure? That could mean, you could go to prison. You could lose everything." "I know," Lucas said, his voice heavy but determined. "But it's the right thing to do. I won't let Daniel grow up in the shadow of lies and corruption. I want him to be proud of his name, of his father. And the only way to ensure that is to come clean, to make amends for the wrongs my family has done." Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes. "You're a good man, Lucas. A better man than your father ever was." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. "I don't know about that. But I'm trying to be the man Daniel deserves as a father." "It won't be easy, Amelia. There will be trials, media scrutiny. Are you prepared for that? For what it might mean for you and Daniel?" Amelia stepped closer, taking Lucas's hands in hers. "We're in this together, Lucas. Whatever comes, we'll face it as a family." As Lucas looked into Amelia's eyes, he felt a surge of emotions: gratitude, love, and a glimmer of hope for the future. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges and sacrifices. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of dismantling his father's corrupt empire. He would face the consequences of years of turning a blind eye. But tonight, he would hold on to this moment, the knowledge that he had a son who loved him and a woman who stood by him, even in the darkest of times. As they stood there, the city lights twinkling below them, Lucas made a silent vow. He would build a new legacy, one of honesty and integrity. And no matter what sacrifices he had to make, he would ensure that Daniel had a future he could be proud of. The challenges ahead were daunting, but with his newfound family by his side, Lucas felt ready to face whatever came next. The truth, no matter how painful, would set them free. And in that truth, they would find the strength to build a better future, together. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, as if the weather itself was reflecting the gravity of the day ahead. Lucas stood in front of his closet, methodically buttoning up a crisp white shirt. His movements were mechanical, his mind elsewhere, rehearsing the words he would soon speak that would change his life forever. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, his voice sounding strangely hollow to his own ears. Amelia entered, already dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress. Her face was a mask of concern and support. "Are you sure about this, Lucas?" she asked gently. "Once you do this, there's no going back." Lucas turned to face her, his expression resolute. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "It's the only way to make things right. For us, for Daniel, for all the people who've been hurt by my father's actions, and my own willful ignorance." Amelia stepped closer, straightening his slightly crooked tie with practiced ease. The familiar gesture, so domestic and intimate, sent a pang through Lucas's heart. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a world where they had never been separated, where mornings like this, quiet, tender moments before facing the day, had been their norm. "What do we tell Daniel?" Amelia asked, her hands lingering on his chest. Lucas sighed heavily. "The truth, or at least as much of it as he can understand. He deserves to know why his life is about to change dramatically." As if summoned by their conversation, Daniel's voice called out from the hallway. "Mom? Dad? Are you awake?" "In here, buddy," Lucas called back, sharing a meaningful look with Amelia. Daniel bounded into the room, still in his pajamas, his hair a wild mess. He stopped short when he saw his parents' serious expressions. "What's wrong?" he asked, his earlier exuberance fading. "Did something bad happen?" Lucas knelt down to his son's level, placing his hands gently on Daniel's shoulders. "Nothing bad has happened, son. But your mom and I need to talk to you about something important. Something that's going to affect all of us." Over the next half hour, Lucas and Amelia did their best to explain the situation to Daniel in terms he could understand. They talked about how Lucas's father, Daniel's grandfather, had done some bad things in his business, and how Lucas had only just found out about it. They explained that Lucas needed to tell the authorities what he knew, even though it might mean he would be in trouble for a while. Daniel listened with a furrowed brow, his young mind struggling to grasp the complexities of the situation. "But you didn't do anything wrong, did you, Dad?" he asked, his voice small and worried. Lucas felt his heart constrict. How could he explain the nuances of complicity, of turning a blind eye, to a 10-year-old? I made mistakes, Daniel," he said carefully. "I didn't know everything that was happening, but I should have asked more questions. I should have looked harder. And now, I need to make it right." Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then, with the simple wisdom of a child, he said, "But you're fixing it now, right? That's what matters." Lucas felt tears prick at his eyes. He pulled Daniel into a tight hug, marveling at his son's capacity for forgiveness and understanding. "That's right, buddy. I'm going to do everything I can to fix it." As they prepared to leave for Lucas's office, where he would meet with his lawyers before contacting the authorities, the atmosphere in the penthouse was tense but determined. Lucas had spent the early hours of the morning preparing documents, gathering evidence, and making arrangements for the legal storm that was about to break. Just as they were about to head out, Lucas's phone rang. It was Jack Thornton again. Lucas hesitated, then answered, putting the call on speaker. "Lucas," Jack's voice came through, sounding panicked. "Where are you? We need to talk immediately. The SEC is—" "I know about the SEC, Jack," Lucas interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "And I know about a lot more than that. I'm coming into the office now. Gather the board. We need to have a serious discussion." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Jack spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. "What exactly do you know, Lucas?" "Everything, Jack. I know everything. And it's time to face the music." Without waiting for a response, Lucas ended the call. He turned to Amelia and Daniel, his expression grave. "I think things are about to get complicated. Amelia, maybe you and Daniel should stay here." "No," Amelia said firmly, taking his hand. "We're in this together, remember? Whatever happens, we face it as a family." Daniel nodded vigorously, slipping his small hand into Lucas's free one. "Yeah, Dad, we're with you." Lucas felt a surge of emotion, gratitude and love washing over him. Drawing strength from their support, he nodded. "All right then, let's go." The ride to Blackwood Tower was tense, the city passing by in a blur outside the car windows. As they pulled up to the imposing glass and steel structure that bore his family name, Lucas felt a strange mix of determination and trepidation. This building, this company, had been his life for so long. Now, he was about to tear it all down. In the lobby, they were met by a visibly agitated Jack Thornton. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw Amelia and Daniel. "Lucas, what's going on?" "Who are—" "Not now, Jack," Lucas cut him off. "Is the board assembled?" Jack nodded, his expression wary. "They're waiting in the main conference room." "Lucas, please, whatever you're thinking of doing, save it," Lucas said firmly. Turning to Amelia and Daniel, he spoke softly. "Wait for me in my office, okay? This won't take long." As Lucas strode towards the conference room, he could feel the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him. But he also felt a sense of liberation. For too long, he had lived in the shadow of his father's legacy, blindly perpetuating a system built on lies and corruption. Now, finally, he was taking control of his own destiny. He pushed open the doors to the conference room, facing the assembled board members, men and women he had worked alongside for years, some of whom he had considered friends. Their faces ranged from confused to concerned to outright hostile. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas began, his voice steady and clear. "I've called you here today because it's time for the truth to come out. For years, this company has operated in the shadows, built on a foundation of lies, bribery, and illegal activities. That ends today." A murmur of shock and disbelief rippled through the room. One of the older board members, Harold Winters, stood up angrily. "What are you talking about, Lucas? Have you lost your mind?" Lucas held up a hand, silencing the room. "I have evidence, irrefutable evidence, of years of financial misconduct, bribery, and other illegal activities, dating back to my father's time as CEO and continuing to this day. I've already contacted the authorities. They'll be here soon to begin their investigation." The room erupted into chaos. Some board members shouted in anger, others pleaded with Lucas to reconsider. Jack Thornton sat in stunned silence, his face pale with shock. Above the din, Lucas raised his voice. "I understand that this is a shock. I understand that many of you may feel betrayed. But I cannot, in good conscience, continue to lead this company knowing what I know. It's time for us to face the consequences of our actions and to begin the process of making amends." As he spoke, Lucas noticed movement outside the glass walls of the conference room. Men in dark suits were entering the office, led by a woman he recognized as Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI's white-collar crime division. "It looks like the authorities have arrived," Lucas said, a sense of finality in his voice. "I suggest you all cooperate fully. It's the only way to salvage any hope of leniency." As the FBI agents entered the room, Lucas felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The die was cast. There was no turning back now. Whatever the future held, legal battles, public scrutiny, possibly even prison time, he would face it with his head held high, knowing he had finally done the right thing. As Agent Chen approached him, Lucas had one last thought before the whirlwind of legal proceedings began: Amelia and Daniel. In the midst of this storm, they were his anchor, his reason for facing the truth head-on. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them, not just for his own redemption, but for the future of his family. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, Lucas felt truly free. The truth, painful as it was, had indeed set him free. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal depositions, media frenzy, and emotional turmoil. Lucas found himself at the center of what quickly became the biggest corporate scandal of the decade. The Blackwood name, once synonymous with success and philanthropy, was now tainted with corruption and deceit. Lucas spent long hours cooperating with federal investigators, providing testimony and turning over evidence. The scope of the corruption was staggering, reaching far beyond what even he had initially realized. Government officials, judges, even some law enforcement personnel had been on his father's payroll, creating a web of protection that had allowed the illegal activities to flourish unchecked for years. Through it all, Amelia and Daniel remained his rock. They faced the media circus together, presenting a united front despite the chaos swirling around them. Daniel, showing wisdom beyond his years, faced the situation with remarkable resilience. His unwavering belief in his father's goodness gave Lucas strength on even the darkest days. One particularly grueling afternoon, after a long day of questioning by federal prosecutors, Lucas returned to the penthouse to find Daniel waiting for him, a homemade card in his hands. "I made this for you, Dad," Daniel said, his voice small but determined. "To remind you that you're doing the right thing." Lucas took the card with trembling hands. On the front, in Daniel's childish scrawl, were the words, "World's bravest dad." Inside, Daniel had written, "Sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but that's what makes you a hero. I'm proud of you, Dad." Tears welled up in Lucas's eyes as he pulled his son into a tight embrace. "Thank you, buddy," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "This means more to me than you could ever know." As the legal proceedings progressed, it became clear that while Lucas would face consequences for his role in the company's misdeeds, his full cooperation and proactive approach in exposing the corruption would likely spare him from the harshest penalties. Still, the future of Blackwood Enterprises hung in the balance. Late one night, as Lucas pored over legal documents in his home office, Amelia joined him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You need to rest, Lucas," she said gently. "You can't keep pushing yourself like this." Lucas leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. "I can't stop, Amelia. There's so much to do, so much to set right." Amelia pulled up a chair next to him, taking his hand in hers. "I know, but you're not alone in this. We're in it together, remember?" Lucas looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in days. Despite the stress and uncertainty of their situation, there was a strength in her eyes that took his breath away. He was struck anew by how much he had missed her during their years apart, how much he still loved her. "Amelia," he began, his voice hesitant. "I know we can't just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened, but I want you to know, these past few weeks, having you here, your support, it's meant everything to me." Amelia's eyes softened, a small smile playing at her lips. "Lucas, when I left all those years ago, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Not a day went by that I didn't think of you, wonder what might have been. And now, seeing the man you've become, the father you were to Daniel, I'm falling in love with you all over again." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with years of unspoken feelings and missed opportunities. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Lucas leaned in, his lips meeting Amelia's in a soft, tender kiss. It was a kiss of reconciliation, of new beginnings, of hope for the future. As they parted, both slightly breathless, a noise from the doorway caught their attention. Daniel stood there, a huge grin on his face. "Does this mean we're going to be a real family now?" he asked excitedly. Lucas and Amelia exchanged a look, then burst out laughing, the tension of the past weeks finally breaking. "Come here, you little spy," Lucas called, holding out his arms. Daniel ran to them, and for a moment, they simply held each other, a family reunited against all odds. The next morning brought a new challenge. The board of directors, what was left of it after the arrests and resignations, had called an emergency meeting. The future of Blackwood Enterprises would be decided. As Lucas prepared to leave for the meeting, Amelia stopped him at the door. "Whatever happens in there," she said, straightening his tie, "remember that you have us. We believe in you." The boardroom was tense as Lucas laid out his proposal. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice steady and determined. "Blackwood Enterprises as we know it is finished. The corruption runs too deep, the damage to our reputation too severe. But from these ashes, we have an opportunity to build something new, something better." He outlined his plan: to dissolve Blackwood Enterprises and use the remaining assets to create a new foundation dedicated to corporate transparency and ethical business practices. The foundation would work to expose and prevent the kind of corruption that had plagued their company, turning their story into a cautionary tale and a force for positive change in the business world. "It won't be easy," Lucas concluded. "We'll face skepticism, resistance, and countless challenges. But it's our chance to make amends, to leave a legacy we can be proud of." The room was silent for a long moment after Lucas finished speaking. Then, slowly, one of the older board members stood up. "I've been with this company for 30 years, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I thought I'd seen it all. But what you're proposing, Mr. Blackwood, it's unprecedented. It's brave, and it's exactly what we need to do." One by one, the other board members voiced their agreement. By the end of the day, the decision was made. Blackwood Enterprises would be no more, but from its ashes, the Blackwood Foundation for Corporate Ethics would rise. As Lucas left the boardroom for the last time, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, he felt truly excited about the future. Returning home, he found Amelia and Daniel waiting anxiously. "Well?" Amelia asked, her eyes searching his face. Lucas smiled, pulling them both into a hug. "It's done," he said. "We're starting over, all of us, together." That night, as they sat on the balcony watching the sun set over the city, Lucas felt a profound sense of peace. He had lost his company, his fortune, and his family name had been tarnished. But he had gained something far more valuable: a clear conscience, a renewed sense of purpose, and most importantly, a second chance with the family he loved. As Daniel chattered excitedly about their plans to move to a new home, away from the shadows of Blackwood Tower, and Amelia leaned her head on Lucas's shoulder, he knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. The truth had indeed set them free, and in that freedom, they had found a happiness that no amount of wealth or power could ever provide. The story of Blackwood Enterprises was over, but the story of the Blackwood family, a story of redemption, love, and second chances, was just beginning. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of change as Lucas, Amelia, and Daniel stood in front of their new home. It was a modest two-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a far cry from the luxurious penthouse they had left behind. The red and gold leaves of nearby trees danced in the breeze, a fitting backdrop for this new chapter in their lives. "Well, this is it," Lucas said, a mix of nervousness and excitement in his voice. "Our new beginning." Daniel ran up the front path, his backpack bouncing with each step. "Can I pick my room first?" he called over his shoulder, already reaching for the door. Amelia laughed, the sound light and carefree. "Slow down, sweetheart. Let's all go in together." As they crossed the threshold, Lucas felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This house, with its slightly creaky floorboards and faded wallpaper, represented more than just a change of address. It was a symbol of their fresh start, a life built on honesty and simplicity rather than wealth and power. The first few weeks in their new home were a whirlwind of activity. They painted walls, assembled furniture, and slowly turned the house into a home. Lucas found an unexpected joy in these simple tasks. There was something deeply satisfying about working with his hands, about creating a space for his family with his own effort rather than simply writing a check. One evening, as they sat around their small dining table eating a meal Amelia had cooked, another new experience for all of them, Daniel looked up from his plate with a serious expression. "Dad," he said, his voice hesitant, "some kids at school were talking about us. They said you were a criminal and that's why we had to move." Lucas felt his heart sink. He had known this moment would come, but he had hoped for more time. Sharing a glance with Amelia, he took a deep breath. "Daniel," he began, choosing his words carefully, "what happened with our old company was very complicated. I made some mistakes, and I didn't always do the right thing. But that's why we're here now. We're trying to make things right." Daniel nodded slowly, processing this information. "So, you're not a bad guy?" Lucas felt tears prick at his eyes. "I'm trying very hard not to be," he said softly. "I want to be someone you can be proud of." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then he smiled. "I am proud of you, Dad. You're like one of those superheroes who used to be a bad guy but then became good. Those are always the coolest ones." The tension broke as they all laughed, and Lucas marveled once again at his son's capacity for understanding and forgiveness. As the weeks turned into months, the Blackwood Foundation for Corporate Ethics began to take shape. Lucas worked tirelessly, reaching out to contacts in the business world who hadn't been tainted by the scandal, building a team of dedicated professionals committed to changing the culture of corporate America. It wasn't easy. Many doors were closed to him, his name still synonymous with corruption in some circles. But slowly, surely, the foundation began to gain traction. They launched educational programs for business schools, created a whistleblower support network, and began working with companies to implement more transparent practices. Amelia, drawing on her experience as an English teacher during their years apart, took charge of the foundation's communication strategy. Her clear, compelling way of explaining complex ethical issues helped make their message accessible to a wider audience. One crisp spring morning, almost a year after they had moved into their new home, Lucas received an unexpected call. It was from Sarah Chen, the FBI agent who had led the investigation into Blackwood Enterprises. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice professional but with a hint of warmth, "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, Agent Chen," Lucas replied, curious about the reason for her call. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to give you a heads up," she said. "The Senate Committee on Corporate Ethics is planning hearings on improving oversight in the business world. They're going to be calling on experts to testify, and they want you to appear." Lucas felt his breath catch in his throat. "Me? But why? Surely I'm the last person they'd want to hear from." He could almost hear the smile in Agent Chen's voice as she replied, "On the contrary, Mr. Blackwood. They feel your unique perspective, someone who's seen the problem from the inside and is now working to combat it, could be invaluable. Of course, it's up to you whether you want to participate." After hanging up, Lucas sat in stunned silence for a long moment. The idea of testifying before the Senate, of having his past mistakes aired in such a public forum, was terrifying. But wasn't this exactly the kind of opportunity he had been working towards? A chance to affect real change at the highest levels? When he shared the news with Amelia that evening, her eyes lit up with excitement. "Lucas, this is incredible," she said, squeezing his hand. "Think of the impact you could have." "But what about the media circus?" Lucas asked, voicing his fears. "The scrutiny on our family? Is it fair to put Daniel through that?" As if summoned by the mention of his name, Daniel wandered into the room, a book clutched in his hands. "Put me through what?" he asked curiously. Lucas and Amelia exchanged a look, then Lucas knelt down to his son's level. "Buddy, I've been asked to speak to some very important people in Washington about the work we're doing with the foundation. But if I do, it might mean a lot of people will be talking about our family again. It might not be easy." Daniel considered this for a moment, his young face scrunched in concentration. Then he grinned. "But Dad, isn't that what superheroes do? They do the right thing even when it's hard?" Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. "When did you get so wise, huh?" he asked, ruffling Daniel's hair affectionately. The next few weeks were a flurry of preparation. Lucas worked with the foundation team to prepare his testimony, distilling years of experience and months of research into a compelling narrative. Amelia helped him practice his delivery, offering constructive criticism and unwavering support in equal measure. The night before he was due to fly to Washington, Lucas found himself unable to sleep. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Amelia, and made his way to the living room. To his surprise, he found Daniel curled up on the couch, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "Hey, buddy," Lucas said softly, sitting down next to his son. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" Daniel shook his head. "I was thinking about tomorrow. Are you scared, Dad?" Lucas considered lying, putting on a brave face for his son. But one of the most important lessons he'd learned over the past year was the value of honesty, even when it was difficult. "Yeah, I am a little scared," he admitted. "But you know what? That's okay. Sometimes the things that scare us are the most important things to do." Daniel nodded solemnly. "Like when I had to give that speech at school and I was really nervous, but you told me to imagine everyone in their underwear and it would be okay?" Lucas chuckled, pulling Daniel close. "Something like that, yeah. Though I'm not sure imagining the Senate in their underwear is the best strategy." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the moonlight filter through the curtains. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice sleepy. "Dad, I'm really proud of you. You're my hero." Lucas felt his heart swell with emotion. "And you're mine, buddy," he whispered, planting a kiss on top of Daniel's head. "Now, let's get you back to bed." The next morning, as Lucas prepared to leave for the airport, his family gathered to see him off. Amelia straightened his tie, her touch lingering on his chest. "You've got this," she said softly. "Just speak from your heart." Daniel handed him a small, wrapped package. "It's for good luck," he explained. "Don't open it until you get there." With a final hug and a wave, Lucas set off, his heart full of love and determination. The Senate hearing room was packed when Lucas took his seat at the witness table. Cameras flashed, and he could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. Taking a deep breath, he remembered Daniel's gift and carefully unwrapped it under the table. Inside was a small, handmade badge. In Daniel's messy handwriting, it read, "World's Bravest Dad." Pinning it to the inside of his jacket, hidden from view but close to his heart, Lucas felt a surge of courage. As he began to speak, the nerves fell away. He talked about the culture of greed and secrecy that had allowed corruption to flourish at Blackwood Enterprises. He spoke of the human cost of corporate malfeasance, the workers who lost their jobs, the communities damaged by unethical practices. But he also spoke of hope, of the potential for change, and of the work his foundation was doing to create a more ethical business world. "We stand at a crossroads," he concluded, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "We can continue down the path of unchecked corporate power, where profit is prioritized over people and planet. Or we can choose a different way. We can build a business culture founded on transparency, accountability, and ethical practices. It won't be easy. It will require courage from lawmakers, from business leaders, and from ordinary citizens. But I believe it's a fight worth having. Because at the end of the..." As he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Senators from both parties praised his candor and insights. Reporters clamored for interviews, but all Lucas could think about was getting home to his family. When he finally walked through his front door late that night, exhausted but exhilarated, he found Amelia and Daniel waiting up for him. They engulfed him in a group hug, laughing and talking over each other in their excitement. "We watched you on TV, Dad," Daniel exclaimed. "You were amazing." "He's right," Amelia said, her eyes shining with pride. "You were incredible, Lucas." As they sat together, Lucas recounting the details of the day, he felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead was still long, the work of rebuilding his reputation and effecting real change in the corporate world far from over. But in this moment, surrounded by the love of his family, Lucas knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The Blackwood name was no longer associated solely with scandal and corruption. Now, it was becoming synonymous with redemption, with the fight for corporate responsibility. It wasn't the legacy his father had envisioned, but it was one that Lucas could be proud of, one that he could pass on to Daniel with a clear conscience. As he tucked Daniel into bed that night, his son sleepy but still buzzing with excitement, Lucas reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The pain of separation, the shock of revelation, the hard work of rebuilding, it had all led to this. A simple life, filled with love, purpose, and the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. "Dad?" Daniel murmured, his eyes heavy with sleep. "Do you think we made a difference today?" Lucas smiled, smoothing his son's hair. "I think we did, buddy. And we're going to keep making a difference, every single day." As he turned out the light and softly closed Daniel's door, Lucas felt a renewed sense of determination. The path ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with his family by his side and the lessons of the past to guide him, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The story of the Blackwoods was far from over. In fact, Lucas realized as he joined Amelia on the porch, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, their greatest chapter was just beginning.